Welcome to Nugget 151 with Steve Groman, and we are returning today with our guest Mike from New Mexico. And if you didn't listen to the previous Nugget, I invite you to do that. Mike talked about growing up on a farm and has a very interesting career in environmental management, services, and construction, and we want to talk to him today about that.
I started out in commercial work. We were doing hotel renovation work and finishing out commercial buildings, finishing out hotels. And I wound up in the environmental water business, and I had a great opportunity of working with some of the top people in the industry, and that had to do with environmental water, and that was cleaning up water resources and doing environmental drilling. It really opened my eyes about what needed to be done to keep our water resources secure, and that is something that we really need to concentrate on, and that is making sure that our water resources are clean and we're able to drink that water. Without water, there's no life.
And I do want to ask people to look at the map, and when you look at Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico, it's desert. Water is crucial and highly important. It's a gem. It's something that's serious. And so you had a key job, I know, being in desert type situations, and taking care of the water is important.
I'm sure just like today, it was probably the same back originally, but has it gotten worse? People that are more political about the topic versus people like you that just really want to do the best that can be done for the land, for the water, for the people, etc., versus political slant on what is done.
We have to have a practical application of the resources and what we need to do to clean up the water. One of the big points is that we need to measure how much water we use and where we use it. We need to do everything possible to keep it as naturally clean as possible, because the toxification of water is just very detrimental to people's health. People that have been in contact with these different chemicals have become very ill. There's written documents about water being consistently dirty. We need to be very cautious about how we manage our water.
You know, there's something, maybe you can answer this. It may be totally off topic in a sense. I remember as a kid, I was born and raised in San Antonio. The Edwards Aquifer is what feeds the area. That's where San Antonio gets the water from. I remember the news back when I was a kid, I forget the exact numbers, but say the aquifer was at 712 or something. But if it dropped a little bit, like 2 or 3 points, they would start to get worried. It would drop a little bit, and they'd put water rationing and shut down. You can't water. But what I find interesting is here we are years later, 1.5 million more people in that whole region, and the aquifer's still at the same level. Do you know how much? Why is that? According to what they were saying back then, if we're going to run out of water if the people that are there keep using it. But now we've got 1 million more people plus, and it's still at the same level. But the attitude is still coming across the same.
Why couldn't you water your yard in 1975,
right.
now
a
more
million
people have moved in, and now everyone's watering their yard?
Right. A couple million people more can be there, and everything's still fine. I don't understand
the management of water. There is definite assessments, and as we go, as the aquifers recharge, and so you have your rainfall, and then water is coming in from different areas or different regions, that supplies the aquifer. And it's just critically important that we manage the water properly like they did back in the old days. And the farmers and the ranchers, they had to abide by what good Lord had in store. We had to be frugal. Didn't matter if you had an overabundance of water that season, knowing that in a few years or whatever that you might be hitting a drought cycle. We've seen these surges in water, so we must assess what we do. People that are managing our water in the different agencies, they need to be very careful about how they put the water out there and how they go about managing that.
Back in the day, I guess, because people were conscious of stuff like that, it was a big deal to them. The political nature of it, I hate to use that word again, but the aspect of it versus the honesty aspect of it, those don't balance out sometimes, it seems. I'm with you that we need to have a good management procedure and keep it clean, because it is crucial. Because like you said, water is extremely critical to life. It can't exist without it. How do you see things today?
We need to be practical, and for something to be sustainable, it has to be financially feasible also. So you have to take all these different points when you're managing your natural assets, and especially with water, that is the biggest assessment, and we have to make sure that we have an ongoing supply because of the simple fact that we're having a rise in the amount of population. We have to be very critical on how we plan everything. And in the long term, if we don't manage our natural resources, then humans can't survive.
Will we ever get to the place where we can be financially feasible to drink the ocean water, to clean it up and take the salt out? And where do we stand on that aspect of things? Do you know?
I will say this, that there's some of the best desalinization technology out now. And as I don't know if a lot of people know, but there is a lot of major size desalinization plants that are in Saudi Arabia and all these other countries. And they're taking that brackish water and they're cleaning it up. It can be drinkable. Potable water is very important.
Right.
And the reuse of our water is very important. But at the same time, when you're managing the water, you can't have an overabundance of chemicals in supposedly cleaning up the water, because the residual effect is harming animals or plant life and the humans. You have these toxic forever chemicals now in the water and people don't even know about. This is fundamentally important that we use natural strategies to secure our water resources.
We want to talk about some of the environmental projects that you had dealing with federal land, and I understand that we have to be careful on what you say, but it is interesting, and so tell us what you can. I know that you worked on a big project in southern Nevada. What can you tell us about that might be interesting to our audience?
There was an assessment that had to be done because of the leaching effect from the chemicals that were being manufactured, and that dates back to World War II. That has to do with rocket fuel. We had to go in and drill some monitor wells, and then there was an assessment, an approximation of how much of the chemical, which is perchlorate, had been leaching into the aquifers. We had to drill quite a few wells and make a determination on that, so then that way the engineers could make a calculation or start figuring out how much chemicals were being leached into the aquifer. Being involved as we had the transfer tanks being changed from single hull to double hull tanks, and so that was a big initiative that was put forth by the EPA, and so we were involved also in drilling monitor wells there, and that way the engineers could figure out or have an idea of the amount of fuel that was on top of the aquifer.
Was there a cleanup involved, or we've got to not use this aquifer? What was the outcome?
It was very simple. After the monitor wells were done, then there was a practical assessment of the amount of fuel that was on top of the aquifer, and then I wasn't the only company involved in this as far as the drilling, but then we would go in and put in these skimmer pumps, and then they would start pumping the fuel right off the top of the aquifers.
Because it separates. You could technically get that cleaned up.
It's a floater, it's an apple, so that's going to stay on top of the water. So then you have the ability through these specialized pumps that can float on top of that, and then it would draw the fuel up, and then they could separate that and continue with the cleanup of that aquifer.
And so were you successful?
I believe the engineering firm was successful in that. I know that we did what we needed to do, and that was a tremendous learning experience. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do that, to help clean up our water resources, because water is something that is critical. For without water, there is not life.
I guess there's quite a bit of satisfaction to knowing that you made a huge difference.
It was something that was very fulfilling, more than anything else, being able to be part of something that was successful to clean up the environment is something that just makes me feel very fulfilled that I was able to be a small cog in that big wheel.
Of all the stuff that takes place now, we'll call it acid rain, with the chemicals, with the fertilizers, with the poisons, with all the medications that go through waste treatment plants and back the water gets dumped back in. Do you have any idea what would a good assessment of the state of the water in this country? If you could put a number on it or a percentage presented a comment, what would you think? What's the state of the water? Because I know we go to places and we don't drink the water. We just don't drink the water.
Well,
4 filter systems, and then we use alkaline water. But what do you think the state of water is in this country?
That is something that it just depends upon the region that you're in to make an assessment of how toxified the water is. And when you're using chemicals or other treatment methods that you're using to supposedly clean up the water, well, then there's residual effects on your internal organs. So when people drink water, there are side effects to that. We just have to be very cautious about where we drink the water and what we're drinking. And as you know, there's all these stories of these different regions or these different localities that have some very serious toxified water. There's constant stories in the newspapers and online. We need to be very cautious and frugal about our ingesting water because of all the dumping that's done on the water that's being reused. And it goes through these plants. So
it's a personal responsibility that you need to find out what is being put in the water in your local municipality. I know earlier when I was talking about the desert and I said that water is extra crucial out there, and you kind of looked at me funny. I know there's tons of underground water, aquifers, rivers, and like in the Pacific Northwest, although it's desert region in many areas, they have so much water from the Columbia River. So I realized that even if it doesn't rain in dry areas, there's plenty of water. Were you looking at me because there is plenty of water out there, or were you agreeing with me? Am I wrong? Do you remember when we had that?
Yes.
When you looked at me like that?
We can get into the technology side of things, and you're bringing up certain regions, and there's certain aspects of certain pollutants that are out there. People need to just be very careful about what they drink. That is key, and you can always go online and get a report of the water of where you're living or where you're going.
The main takeaway that we want and that you want is that people research the water that they are drinking and cooking with and showering with. It isn't just what you're ingesting through your mouth. Our skin is absorbing water, and we need to be careful because I know you had mentioned to us that there have been studies of, I don't know how to say it, but mass death, or they've been able to find where many people have died because of the water in certain areas.
Yes, and there's one article that came out in the newspaper, and they tracked it back. There were 50,000 deaths in California, and that they tracked it back to the fact that they were drinking tap water. So there is an overabundance of chemicals in what you're ingesting. That goes right into your cellular structure. Drink clean water. Water is life.
I think it's a great line to end it with. Thank you, Mike.